This week on the Steele Report.
And that's really at the heart of what's going on. It's about protecting these kids from the terrible things that are happening to them at the hands of the cartels. And as a mom, that's what's driving my policy making about what's going on at the southern border.
We had her opponent on earlier, and this week it's incumbent Republican, 2nd District Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. She'll be our guest. That's coming up.
Now from KWWL, this is the Steele Report.
And welcome to this week's edition of the Steele Report. Once again, as we can see, we have another congressional candidate, and this is the incumbent Republican, Ashley Hinson. And now in her second term, she's won 2 straight, going for 3. We appreciate you coming back. You've been on the show many times before, so we appreciate that, Congresswoman. But I want to ask you just right off the bat, we've seen your opponents have both been on the air, both the Democratic opponent, Sarah Corkery, and also the independent opponent this year, and that is Jody Puffett, both of whom have been pretty critical of you in office, which you might expect. As you said, it kind of goes with the territory. So why do you deserve this 3rd term, do you think?
Well, I think I've made it very, very clear to voters that I am an Iowan working for Iowans. I got into this race in the first place because I'm a mom, right? I am fighting for my kids, 13 and 11 now, which is hard to believe that they're that old. But, you know, I think about the next generation and what we're offering them. And I think the Harris-Walz agenda will be a continuation of 4 more years of what we've seen under Biden-Harris. I don't think we can afford that in this country. Look what that's gotten us. It's gotten us record high inflation, which is a tax on every single Iowan and American. I've been pushing back against that. It's gotten us a country that's less safe with a wide open border. I've been pushing back on that. But I've still been able to cut through a lot of the chaos and dysfunction and get bills passed, which I think is important. And as I'm talking to Iowans on my 22 county tour, I've done 22 in-person town halls, so people can come ask me whatever they want. I don't censor those questions. I call on people in the audience. I think it's important for people to know where I stand and why, and Iowans will always get that with me. So I think that's why I deserve another term. I've been willing to come to the table and make sure I'm pushing back on things that are not good for Iowa while still making sure we're getting the good stuff across the finish line.
So when you hold those town hall meetings, do you always get a plant or two that is there from the opposition, or how does that go usually? Yeah.
I don't really know. I mean, I can usually tell if I recognize someone, obviously, Ron, in the audience, but I think what's important is that I've heard from people on both sides of issues. I recently did a town hall in Dubuque where I had someone who came and was very critical about what's going on with Israel and the Palestinian people. My answer to him, he probably didn't like it, but everybody else in the room did, and that was that we need to continue to stand up for our allies on the global stage when we have an administration that's incredibly weak. So I'm going to, again, answer people's questions in a transparent and honest way. And my pledge to people has always been, if I don't have an answer for your question today, I'll find out and we'll get back to you. And I think that's what we need more of.
So the Democratic key issue among several, but their key issue is reproductive rights. Again, where do you stand on that? Because they've definitely labeled you as someone who is against abortion totally, with no exceptions. Tell everybody where you are on that. Yeah.
Well, I am pro-life, Ron, and I believe in exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother, like most Iowans that I've heard from out on the road. I believe being pro-life is about more than just the issue of abortion, though, and so that's where a lot of my work in Congress has been. It's been on maternal health care. When you look at Congress this year, we haven't gotten a whole lot of bills across the finish line, but one of them was mine, a bill that's aimed at making sure women have preventative resources to hopefully end the tragedy of stillbirth. So that bill passed 408 to 3. I just introduced a new bill to look at contraceptive access. I've supported over-the-counter birth control and urged the FDA to approve more methods that are already safe and effective for adults to be available over the counter. So I've worked across the aisle on many of these priorities to try to get them across the finish line, and that will continue to be my stance. I would rather be on the side of life than where my opponents are, which is that they believe, and their policies back that up, that they will advocate for abortion on demand until birth. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong for you not to provide aid to a baby who survived a botched abortion. I think those policies speak for themselves, and I'd rather err on the side of life and supporting life.
This Life at Conception Act, did you sign on to that? But that's not going to go anywhere. Why did you sign that?
Yeah. Well, again, Ron, I'm pro-life, and I think when you look at a piece of legislation like that, it's about respecting life at all stages. And I would approach that bill the same as I would any other bill. Before I would support it on the floor, I would want to make sure that it had, as I mentioned, the exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, and fetal anomaly that I've talked about, and also about IVF. I think about the ability to expand and grow families. We should be doing everything we can and everything we can to support people in making that happen. And so before any bill goes through the process in Washington, D.C., that's how I would approach it. But again, what I think is really important here is it's about valuing life at all stages and doing anything we can to have more healthy babies and more healthy moms.
So you would not support it, though, if it didn't have the exceptions in it?
Right. I would want to make sure all that was included before it came to the floor.
So we have an economic situation right now where the trillions and trillions of dollars, I think we're up $34, $35 trillion in debt. Does anybody in Congress, you among them, have any way to pay that off? And when does it end? You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's why you see the work that we've done on the Appropriations Committee be so important. Appropriations actually fights over a very, very small portion of the pie, but we have worked to meaningfully reduce government spending. Actually, it was held pretty steady the years of, I think, 2010 through 2019 before COVID. But what you saw happen during COVID was some of these agencies got boosts to their budget by up to 30% in some cases. So a lot of our work in the past year has been to really try to right-size these agencies since Republicans took over control of Congress. My first 2 years, from 21 to 23, was Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and President Biden, and they just thought that money was growing on trees in the basement of the Capitol. I voted against $6 trillion in spending, and at the time I said, what is this going to do? It's going to increase rampant inflation, and that's exactly what we saw happen. As their agency heads were out there saying, oh, this is transitory, it's only going to last for X number of days, Iowans are now paying a new baseline for their gas and their groceries, and that's just not, that inflation is a real tax on Iowans every single day. So it's my goal to push back on that kind of wasteful spending. I do think we need to right the ship, and I think our budget chairman, Jody Arrington, he's from Texas, he's put out a number of really good policies to help us try to get toward balancing a budget, but certainly right now that's not going to happen if Democrats take control. Again, when I say I'm worried about a Harris-Walz agenda, they will raise your taxes. They'll let the Trump tax cuts expire, and our ranking Democrat on our Appropriations Committee said the quiet part out loud. She said, we don't have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem. I think that speaks for itself.
One of your opponents, Jody Puffett, on this program said she got into the race, though, after you voted last April for that big package. Why did you support that?
Yeah.
And all the delegation did in Iowa, yeah.
Well, if there's one thing that President Trump did right, it's that he didn't get us into any foreign wars. And I respect his stance on the global stage, and deterrence means peace through strength, and that's not what we have under President Biden. So I'm a believer in America first, but not America alone. And what I don't want to see happen is our young men and women end up fighting over there against Russia, against Iran, against China. And I think, again, we wouldn't be in this position if we didn't have weak leadership in the White House right now. But this is where we are, and I think, unfortunately, as a result of that, we've had to make sure we're standing up for our allies overseas, because we cannot let Putin win this war. I had a chance to travel there, and you talk about how important oversight is for these dollars. I went over there and actually met with our Brigadier General. I sat down with them to see how they're getting equipment in and out, what sorts of accountability measures are in place. And I was confident. I voted for some packages, I voted against some packages, right? And after that meeting, I was confident that we had the network in place, and our generals were doing a good job of respecting taxpayer money in that process. And so that's why I supported our allies.
So we've gone past the one-year anniversary of the Hamas and Israeli war. So what should the United States be doing to help Israel overtake what's happening there, and finally, first of all, bring all the hostages home, right, and bring this fighting to an end?
Right, and I mean, there are still dozens of hostages that Hamas is keeping confined in their terror tunnel network in Gaza. Hamas is a terrorist organization, plain and simple. They broke the ceasefire last October 7th. So I think we need to continue to stand with our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel. We need to stand against terrorism, and we can't let that fester. Whether it's Hamas or, as we've seen, Hezbollah, the Houthis, who are terrorizing the shipping abilities in that region. They're all funded by Iran. They're all Iranian proxies, because Iran is too cowardly to actually fight these wars themselves. So they just funnel those dollars. So the way we push back, we continue to provide military assistance and aid to Israel. But we also need to make sure at the same time we are cutting off any assistance to Iran. Those dollars should not be allowed to flow to them. We should have never undone what was those dollars that were being held, $6 billion. money is fungible to Iran, and that's exactly what we've seen happen. And now their coffers are full, oil is flowing, and then they're devoting those resources to their proxies fighting those wars.
So the border crisis continues in the eyes of many to be a crisis, even though the number of people crossing the border has dropped a little bit. And have you been to the border? And
yes,
what
twice.
have the Border Patrol agents told you about what they need and how you can get that help to them?
Yeah. So this border crisis is a direct result of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Vice President Harris is our border czar. The media, the national media, not you, but the national media are trying to erase that title for her. And I think that's wrong, and she is accountable and he is accountable for everything that's happening at our southern border. So whether it's the humanitarian crisis, which I've introduced legislation to make sure kids are not being recycled at the southern border and used to get these migrants in, to making sure that these agencies are more accountable. I actually got Secretary Mayorkas in our committee for the first time on the record to admit that there was a crisis at the southern border. They need policies that are actually going to work. Those are policies that were in place under President Trump's administration. Remain in Mexico. It was a huge deterrent to border crossings. Making sure we're actually building a barrier wall. That is a huge deterrent. Also, making sure our CBP agents have the technology that they need. We have automated surveillance towers that are a great force multiplier for our agents on the southern border, so they can really go after the bad guys and process things in the order that they need to. Those are policies that work. Unfortunately, what we've seen is under this administration, asylum has been weaponized. Tens of millions of illegal immigrants have come across the southern border, hundreds of people on the terrorist watch list, and thousands upon thousands of military-aged Chinese men who are not coming here out of the goodness of their hearts, right? They're evading border detection for a reason. So this is the stuff that certainly keeps me up at night. We've passed a number of policies out of the House, HR 2 being our main border legislation that I think was the right legislation. It does all of those things and, again, gives CBP and ICE the ability to do their job.
And would you admit, though, that in some cases, and the big concern for a lot of people is breaking up families. You're a mom, so you know how that would act,
yeah.
how that would impact you. So
yeah.
What's the answer to that, though? Making sure families are not torn apart and some family members sent back and others are allowed to stay.
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is knowing that these kids are being recycled, right? So you talk about needing to separate some children who are being trafficked. Mm-hmm. Like that is exactly what we've seen happen. So my bill, the Prince Act, which would allow kids under the age of 14 who we know are being recycled, CBP agents are telling us they're seeing repeat kids come through and they recognize them and they know they're being trafficked. Allowing CBP to do that will enable them to know, hey, this child does not belong to this person. And that's really at the heart of what's going on. It's about protecting these kids from the terrible things that are happening to them at the hands of the cartels. And as a mom, that's what's driving my policy making about what's going on at the southern border.
Okay, we're going to take a real short break here on the Steele Report. Come back more with the current incumbent Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson in just a moment.
And done that work in the district. I will never forget that the bosses I work for are the people of Iowa.
And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steele Report with congressional candidate, happens to be the incumbent Republican, Ashley Hinson. Thank you for coming back to the program. The Farm Bill just expired. Mm-hmm. Nothing's happening. What's your method of making sure that this goes forward and finally gets passed? Yeah.
Well, a farm bill is absolutely critical to the state of Iowa, to our economy, to our producers. I tell people all the time, if you ate or put gas in your car or got dressed today, you need to thank an American farmer. And I believe that's true. And our farmers need the certainty that comes with the farm bill. And frankly, they don't have time for all the politics that have gone on around the farm bill. The House Agriculture Committee has passed a bill. So we laid down our marker in the House. I've been advocating to get that bill across the finish line. So I actually just led a letter a few weeks ago to our House leadership to ask them to put that farm bill on the floor so we can move the ball forward. I don't like extensions. We should have gotten this bill done last year. But the Senate, unfortunately, has not even put out legislative text. So if you're looking to someone to blame here, I would say we're trying to move the ball forward in the House. The Senate needs to put their marker down so we can actually negotiate in divided government. So I'm hopeful by the end of the year we're able to come to a package and agreement. But if not, I will support another extension. It's about the certainty and making sure that our farmers have access to the programs they know and trust.
It seems like there are a lot of people in Congress who do not like farmers for some reason. Yeah. Is it because of subsidies? What is it? Why do they not back our farmers as they should?
Well, and I think the Farm Bill is a unique challenge because I do think the majority of members of Congress do support our producers. I think that there are some who are trying to make life harder for them through the regulatory side, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think when you look at the price tag for some of these programs is what gets some people on the fence about supporting them. I look at ROI. When I look at what's the best investment for taxpayer dollars, is investing in food security important? Yes, it is. There are many food security provisions included in the Farm Bill. My bill to allow access to precision agriculture equipment. You talk about the cost of equipment right now and making sure we can support our equipment producers here in the United States. That's important to an area like Northeast Iowa. My bill to help with access to agriculture equipment is included. Looking at supply chain issues. When I say food security is national security, I also serve on the China Select Committee. Communist Chinese Party is not our friend, and they are doing everything they can to undermine the United States. Unfortunately, we are reliant upon them in the supply chain for many of the additives to our feedstocks, so many of the minerals and vitamins and pharmaceuticals are produced in China. So my bill to actually take a look at that is included in the Farm Bill. So we were successful in getting many of Iowa's priorities, which I see as America's priorities, included in that legislation, which is why I'm a fierce advocate. Again, more than 140 of my colleagues signed on to my letter to our leadership to try to bring this to the floor.
So when you heard former President Trump a few weeks ago say or threaten tariffs against John Deere about moving any more production out of state, particularly Mexico, what did you think about that particular threat?
Well, specifically, I look at tax policy and how that fits into this, because when you look at the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we saw no more of that people who were fleeing the United States for manufacturing because the tax policy matched what their needs were. That created jobs and economic opportunity, and that's what I want to see happen. I think tariffs should be a last resort in this case because also our agriculture economy is in a very different place than it was 4 years ago. You look at input costs, labor costs, energy costs, that's the other side of that equation. No wonder people are spending less on new equipment. It's because of all those inflationary costs that they've experienced under the Biden-Harris administration. So my biggest goal will be to work with President Trump to help support our producers here in the United States, and we should be fighting for every single American job possible.
Do you agree with, though, a tariff would be the thing to do? Is that right?
I don't know. I don't have a ready opinion on that. I'd want to talk with both sides before I gave you an opinion on that. I think, like I said, tariffs should always be the last resort there. I would like to see us more focused on trade. I think that our trade policy in this country has been incredibly lacking in the last 3.5 years. The best way to counteract the loss of these jobs and the loss of economic opportunity is, number one, through good tax policy, making sure people have the certainty to make investments and know they can, for instance, as a farmer, deduct that cost so they can do business. But it's also making sure that, again, we talk about the Chinese Communist Party, one of our biggest trading partners still is China. Yep. We need to be careful about that while still making overtures toward other people. We need to be having those conversations about who might be a better trading partner for us. So that's what I think the balance is, and I think President Trump understands that.
So recently I saw the Democrat Party put out new billboards basically targeting some members of Iowa congressional delegation about Project 25. Where do you stand on that? And there seems to be a fear factor going into that. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, there is. It's a lot of fear mongering, Ron, and I think that's really unfortunate. And I haven't read Project 2025. My agenda for 2025 is what Iowans tell me to do. It's what I've heard out on all my 22 county tours, and I find it a little bit ironic that we only started hearing about that when President Biden had a disastrous debate performance earlier this year. That's when they're like, oh shoot, we need a new boogeyman here because our guy doesn't have it. And that's a whole other conversation about how they ousted President Biden and put in a nominee without any votes in the process. I think that's atrocious how they handled that. Look, I do all those town halls so people can come up and ask me questions, and they know what they're going to get from me, and that's my approach to legislating, and it's going to be my approach to 2025. You know what's on my priority list? Lowering inflation, making sure we have a safe country, and making sure rural America is protected. That's the policy I'm going to focus on. So Democrats have labeled former President Trump as the threat to democracy. Who do you think is the real threat to democracy? Yeah. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest threat is the fact that he's had 2 assassination attempts on his life. So I think the biggest threat to democracy is really our debt in this country. It's why we need to get serious about that at the congressional level. You talk about the future and prosperity of our country. If we don't get that under control and limit the size and scope of government, I'm really worried about the trajectory of our country. So when I talk about getting into this because of my boys, I mean, I talk to moms all over the district, and I think about reducing the regulatory burden and that cost. Why is childcare so expensive? You know, over the years, people have added different paperwork, and I've seen it in person of how much overhead these providers who they really at the end of the day want to take care of our kids, but instead they have to fill out a bunch of paperwork for the USDA for a program they're administering. I mean, that's a lot of headache and a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's what I'm focused on, and I think that is a real threat to our country going forward.
So this race usually is a very expensive race. I was around 6 million, maybe something.
Yeah.
Not too
It's been
far.
as high as 10, but yeah, who's counting?
So how much are you going to have to spend? I notice you haven't had a lot of television ads or anything. You haven't felt it necessary this time around. And I know your opponent told me she's not getting any help from the Democratic Party. Maybe that's changed, but it just takes so much money to run for this 2-year seat, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it is every 2 years, and I think that's by design, and it's meant to hold us as members of Congress accountable. And Ron, I think the reason I've been successful in the past 2 years is because I have gone out and listened to Iowans and done that work in the district. I will never forget that the bosses I work for are the people of Iowa. I run what I call an 18-person small business, right? I have some Iowa staff, I have some DC legislative staff, but at the end of the day, we are a casework operation and a customer service operation first and foremost. And so I think that's why people continue to send me back, and it's why I haven't seen a whole lot of competition this time. It's because I've done the job.
So your Democratic opponent, though, Sarah Corkery, said you do have a large staff, and I think she used the figure $1 million, then kind of hinting that she might get rid of that. What would you do? I mean, do you need that staff? I mean, is that money well worth spending?
Well, let me say this. We've returned thousands upon thousands of dollars to Iowa taxpayers. It's Iowans' money. It's not the government's money. And we need caseworkers to be able to advocate to all of the alphabet soup agencies that are creating headaches for Iowans every single day. You talk about the good legislation that I've been able to introduce, the Stillbirth Prevention Act, the Sergeant Ketchum Rural Veterans Mental Health Act. You look at my body of work, that doesn't just happen without legislative staff to help you get that done. So I think it's really important that we've built a team who respects taxpayers, and I'm judicious with our dollars, that we get, every member gets a representational allowance. We have 3 offices in the district because I have 22 counties that I represent. It's a large geographical area, and again, when I talk about introducing legislation to make sure that no matter what your zip code is, you have the same access, that's important whether you have a district in Los Angeles that's very, very geographically compact, or a district like mine in Northeast Iowa where you have a quarter of the state of Iowa in essence. So my district team is all Iowans. Those are incredibly important people. So if you call our Cedar Rapids office, you might get Reagan or Anna on the phone. If you call our Waterloo office, you might get Christina on the phone. If you call our Dubuque office, you might get Roy on the phone. These are Iowans working for Iowans every single day.
Okay. I'm going to give you the last word, wrapping things up here. Again, top issue, and why do you deserve that 3rd term?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would thank Iowans for supporting me in my first 2 terms, and I would ask for your support again because I am working hard to deliver for you what I've heard directly from you. I'm a mom. I'm a minivan driving mom working for moms and dads and families in eastern Iowa. I will continue to stand up for taxpayers. I'll continue to fight for rural America to have a seat at the table, and I will continue to prioritize safety and security for you.
This is incumbent Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. Thanks, as always, for taking the time to come on the Steele Report. We appreciate that. We're going to wrap things up here in just a moment. We'll be right back. And as we wrap up for this week's edition of the Steele Report, don't forget about a big event coming up this Friday night, November 1st.
We're excited to invite you to AFIL's Music with a Mission. It's our annual fundraiser that we do. We're having it at the BN venue. It's on Friday, November 1st, and you can see behind me all the silent auction items we have. Make sure you attend. So to get tickets, go to afil.org. That's our website, and click on Get Tickets. They are $30 in advance. You can still come at the door, but it's $35. We're going to have 2 bands. We're going to have some food, some drink, live auction items. We're really excited for you to attend. It's helping to raise funds so that we can keep funding our veteran programs that we have here for veterans in need.
There's something for everybody with our silent and live auction. A couple of our items include this signed Cardinals authentic practice helmet that we got that will be in there. We also have a volleyball signed by Bobby Peterson, and then we also have Jack Campbell's signed Iowa jersey and a signed Lions football by Jack Campbell. that will be part of our live auction. Bidding will probably start around 6 o'clock on Friday night and will be done around 9.
So that's it for this week. As always, thanks for watching.